They built the system to run smooth, predictable, clean. Everyone had a role, everyone played along, and if someone didn't, the system would correct itself, shame them, isolate them, fix the problem. That's how it worked, until you showed up. You didn't resist, you didn't protest, you just didn't conform. And that's what broke it, because the system doesn't know how to handle quiet defiance. It expects explosions, outbursts, rebellion, things it can label, contain, and dismiss. But you weren't loud, you weren't aggressive, you simply didn't align, and that made you unreadable. They watched you closely, expected you to adjust. You didn't. Expected you to explain. You didn't. Expected you to fall in line. You didn't even look at the line. And slowly, things around you started to crack. Not because you broke them, but because your presence exposed the fractures already there. You didn't bring chaos. You revealed it. You weren't the glitch. You were the mirror. Now they whisper about you like you're a malfunction, a risk, a threat. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you operated outside the code. You didn't fail the system. You just reminded everyone that it was fragile. You didn't break it. You became the error it can't delete. At first, they tried to ignore it. Pretend nothing was off. Act like your presence was just another variable in a system designed to handle variation. But systems don't fear chaos. They fear the untraceable. And you weren't resisting. You were functioning correctly, just not on their terms. You didn't challenge the rules. You exposed the assumptions beneath them. Every time you didn't react the way they expected, the logic broke. Every time you stood still when the current pulled, the pattern glitched. You weren't part of the problem. You were the part they couldn't solve. They started watching more closely, logging your movements, comparing your behavior to the script, but nothing matched. Not because you were unpredictable, because you were consistent in a way that didn't serve their logic. And that scared them more than rage ever could. Because people can brace for explosions, they can contain outrage, but they can't defend against someone who simply operates outside expectation and doesn't need validation to do it. They called you unstable, but it wasn't instability, it was precision, cold, clear, unapologetic. You didn't force the system to collapse. You just walked through it without bending, and it started collapsing on its own. Now they're building updates, patches, protocols, not to improve anything, but to protect themselves from being seen, because you weren't a virus. You were clarity in an environment built on noise. They thought errors came with warnings, red flags, system failures. But you didn't blink red. You didn't trigger alarms. You just existed differently, and the system had no line of code to account for that. No command to explain why someone could move through it without complying, without collapsing, without caring. You didn't play the roles they built, not the loud rebel, not the silent follower. You didn't demand change. You revealed that change had already started, just not in their favor. And that's when the panic began. Because the real threat isn't someone who tries to tear things down. It's someone who walks in like the rules don't apply and nothing breaks until it does. They tried to adapt to you, rewrite the scripts, rebuild the logic, but the glitch spread. Other people noticed, started asking questions, started pulling on threads they were never meant to see, and in every thread they found a trace of you. You weren't recruiting, you weren't influencing, you were just undeniable, because there's nothing more dangerous to a system built on illusion than someone who doesn't need the illusion to survive. Now you're in the code, not as a part of it, but as a contradiction, a presence they can't remove without rewriting the whole thing. And they won't, because if they do, they have to admit the system was fragile all along, so they contain it, deny it, pretend you were an exception. But the truth is, you were the truth they couldn't format. They started responding like machines with corrupted input, repeating commands that no longer made sense, enforcing rules they themselves couldn't justify. You hadn't done anything new, you just kept being exactly who you were, but the system couldn't process it, so it glitched, subtle at first. Conflicting reactions, contradictory statements, people treating you like a threat in one moment and a mystery in the next. Warnings whispered behind closed doors, followed by invitations to cooperate, to explain yourself. They didn't want to understand you, they wanted to convert you, make you legible, predictable, safe, but you refused. Not loudly, not with protest, just by staying aligned with your own internal code. And that, more than anything, was the error they couldn't debug. Because the system runs on compliance masked as choice, and you were choice unmasked. They started isolating you, not to punish, but to protect themselves from the ripple effect. Because truth, when it stands too still for too long, starts to reflect. And no one in the system was built to handle reflection. You didn't act out, you didn't escalate, you didn't threaten their structure, you revealed it. And once something's been revealed, you can't put it back in the dark, you can only pretend it's not staring at you. By now the system knows it can't fix you, so it starts fixing the story, quietly. Rewrites your narrative, labels you difficult, unstable, untrustworthy. Not because you failed, but because you functioned in a way they couldn't contain. You didn't crash the system, you ran outside its limits, and now that limit is exposed. They create warnings. Watch out for people like that. Too independent, too unpredictable. But these are not cautions, they're confessions. They're telling on themselves, because what they really mean is, you don't depend on their approval. You don't need their validation to remain stable. You don't require their framework to operate, and that's what makes you dangerous. You don't want power, you just don't fear the lack of it. You don't want control, you just don't submit to someone else's. You are not seeking chaos, you just refuse their order. And a system built on hierarchy can't tolerate anything that stands on its own, so they keep their distance, redefine you, not because you changed, but because you stayed exactly the same after they failed to change you. And that stillness, that unmovable core, it made every part of their structure feel weak by comparison. Now, they don't call you part of the problem, they call you the reason the system started questioning itself. If you're still here, you were never meant to follow, subscribe, and let the code bend. They no longer treat you like a person to fix. They treat you like an exception to avoid. You're not part of the script anymore. You're the glitch they all walk around pretending they don't see, pretending it didn't change everything they trusted. Because you didn't act out, you didn't sabotage anything, you just existed without permission. And that alone rerouted the logic. It's not that you challenged their authority. It's that your presence made their rules feel optional, and once something feels optional, it stops feeling real. Now they correct each other when your name comes up. Let's not go there. They're just different. But what they really mean is, you can't standardize someone who sees the system as optional. You can't reduce someone who stopped needing to belong. You weren't designed to dismantle anything, but they still blame you for what fell apart, because they can't admit that all it took to reveal the cracks was someone who didn't pretend they weren't there. You don't speak against the structure. You simply don't operate by it. And that silence has spread like a virus they can't isolate. So they name you what they fear most. Not disobedient, not toxic, just uncontrollable. Because if someone like you can exist, clear, consistent, and untouched, then maybe the system wasn't necessary at all. You're not even in the room anymore. You don't show up. You don't speak. You don't engage. But somehow your absence still disrupts the flow. They still shift when your name is mentioned, still look over their shoulder when silence settles in, like the system remembers you and can't reset. Because some errors don't crash the machine, they just change how it thinks. You didn't hack anything. You didn't rewrite the program. You just exposed how fragile the logic was, how conditional the order, how performative the rules. And once that's seen, it can't be unseen. Now every action, every rule enforced, every mask worn feels like a performance on a stage that already collapsed. You became the unseen variable, the control group no one accounted for, and the longer you're gone, the more they realize it wasn't you who was incompatible, it was them. They don't say it, but their behavior gives it away. They second-guess decisions that used to be automatic. They check themselves before enforcing the script, because once someone has seen what doesn't fit and doesn't break, they start asking the question the system fears most. What if this was never right to begin with? And that question, it started with you, not with a manifesto, not with a fight, just with your quiet refusal to participate in a lie. You didn't need to destroy the structure, you just needed to leave it untouched and keep walking. They keep rewriting the rules, but they're not fixing anything, just avoiding what you revealed. Every new policy, every new boundary, every sudden shift in tone, it's not about progress. It's about defense against what you left behind. Because your absence isn't neutral, it's radioactive. It lingers, not loud, not angry, just quietly corrosive. It sits beneath their protocols, their conversations, their decision-making, and every time someone asks why, the real answer echoes back, because of you. Not because you attacked, but because you existed outside the design and it worked. You were never meant to be a lesson, but they're still learning. Every day they remember how you didn't fold, how you didn't ask to stay, how you didn't fight to be seen. You just moved different, and that movement rewired the way they see stillness, silence, and strength. They try to replicate it now, the calm, the clarity, the restraint. But imitation fails when it's rooted in fear, not truth. You didn't become what you are to prove anything. You became it because nothing else made sense anymore. And now you live in contrast, in what they wish they could do, in what they pretend they don't admire. You're no longer the error, you're the alternative, and that makes you irreversible. They don't search for you anymore. They search for traces of you in other people, the same stillness, the same restraint, the same refusal to perform, but it never lands the same. Because what you had wasn't an act, it was structure, internal, built in silence, not for show, but for survival. You weren't trying to be different, you were just unwilling to lie, and that made everything around you look artificial by comparison. Now no one else feels solid. Everyone else talks too much, moves too quickly, reacts too easily. Because once someone like you exists, the mask never sits right again. They try to recreate your detachment, but it turns cold. Try to mimic your clarity, but it turns scripted. Because you weren't trying to look unbothered, you were unbothered. And that difference is impossible to fake. So they keep watching, not to copy, to compare. Everyone after you becomes a shadow against the outline you left behind, a standard you never claimed, but they still use it, quietly, reluctantly, unwilling to admit they miss what they didn't value until it was gone. Because once you showed up, every system interaction after felt less real, less stable, less necessary. You didn't break their logic, you upgraded their awareness. And that's the one patch they don't know how to roll back. They stop trying to delete you, not because they forgave you, but because they realized erasing you meant erasing the part of themselves that finally saw the truth. You didn't disrupt the system, you diagnosed it. And in doing so, you made them see how much of it was built on assumptions, obedience dressed as logic, fear disguised as structure. You were never the virus, you were the test, and they failed. You moved through their architecture like code they couldn't trace. No announcement, no explanation, just silence that broke routines, reactions, reputations. You were proof that something else was possible, and that was enough to make the entire structure unstable. Now they don't fix the glitch, they build around it. Carefully, quietly, like you might reappear if they type the wrong line. But you won't, because you don't need to return to be present. You were never trying to win the system. You just stopped participating, and it started unraveling on its own. And somewhere deep in the back end, beneath all the firewalls and patches and fake smiles, your presence still runs like a silent command, unaligned, unrepentant, undeletable.